You'll see it says recording.
Be right there.
Okay. Go slap Maurice in the head.
I think that was probably the fastest setup I've ever done.
Thanks.
And I told him I wouldn't move either. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sandy Bacik, and I am Global Information Security Manager and Enterprise Architecture. So, if you can think it, I've done it. Nothing surprises me anymore in this field. And I do get excited, and I do get upset. But this session today is talking about those mobile devices. I want you to put your hand up if you do not own a tablet, a mobile device, a smartphone, whether it's personally owned or corporate owned. So everybody has at least one of these wonderful devices. So some of this session might scare you, but it's to give you guidance whether or not you already have a mobile device management system in place, or if you're just starting to look for one and look at the places. Many times, yes, BYOD is bring your own destruction, especially if you start bringing in those personal devices. Been there, done that. Especially when you get a call from the vice president and said, I left my device in the taxi. And we got it shut off and wiped within 10 minutes of that phone call. And then contacted the provider. So anything can happen with those mobile devices. And nothing is going to be a surprise to you by the time you get something implemented and expand from corporate-owned devices to now adding your personally owned devices. It can be done securely, but you need a plan. So today we're going to kind of go talk about what are your needs. You know, some of the gotchas that I've seen along the way, and I personally experienced, as well as don't forget the wonderful monitoring. Being local government, you got it easy. Because here in the States, you can log and monitor everything. When you have a global privately held company like Lord Corporation in 17 different countries, 17 different sets of privacy laws. And all of them are in conflict with each other. Luckily, I've scared our European contingent to not add their personally owned devices. So, bring your own device, bring your own technology. And the slides will be up on the website. So if you want to scribble, go ahead, but my contact information is also going to be on the last slide. You know, you do have to worry about those legal issues, the privacy issues. Because it was, I think, last summer, or maybe even 2 years ago now, even those pagers, those two-way pagers out in California, there was a law enforcement officer that wasn't doing business on his corporate device that did cause a nice stink. When I was up in Washington State and working with a lot of companies up there, holy smokes, what people do with their devices. My device is company owned, and somebody said, oh, do you have this app on here? No. I have a hard time keeping up with my email and phone calls, yet alone adding games and other types of software. So with these legal and privacy issues, you need to think about what are the corporate-owned devices supposed to be. Are you allowing by policy for business use only within reason? And what's reason? When you have them, allow them, it is a privilege, not a right, to allow your personally owned device on your corporate network? Do you have them sign something and take an awareness program or a training session? All of that needs to be considered to help cover all of these issues. If they are using a personally owned device, do you allow them to expense it? The communication costs. And if you're a privately held or a publicly held company, you also have to think about those marketing and sales people that slip it in under their expense reports, under miscellaneous. So you also have to train your accounting department to be able to look at all of those expense forms, because it doesn't all go under telecommunication. You also need to think about separation of data. Confidential, proprietary, intellectual property. Do you want it stored on these mobile devices? Whether it's a smartphone, whether it's an iPad, whether it's a tablet, whether it's even a laptop. You also need to set up those requirements. What can go on these devices? For us, we need to think about export control data and those of us that travel from country to country. You're lucky. You don't have to worry about that. But do you want company data on a device that can easily fall out of a pocket, be left in a cab, can easily be accessed or lost? Do you want your corporate data on here? Yes, the device can be encrypted. But those that attended Black Hat this year, there was one presentation on iPhones. There is now a new release, and it hit the media 2 weeks ago, that power chargers, so the false power chargers for the iPhones is a backdoor hack. So now as you do your replacement cords, you need to even watch that. So what are your requirements for the use of these devices? If it was me, I'd leave it at home. On the weekends, it stays on my counter until I get ready for work on Monday. My personal life, I only have a dumb cell phone, one of those old flip phones. Because if you don't want to talk to me, I'm not going to answer, especially when it's my time. So you need to think about that quality. Do you have a secure tunnel? How are you securing that data? You need to think about all of these questions before you put a mobile device in the hands of an employee. So these next set of slides are security considerations that you need to think about and at least ask. If management says, we accept the risk, even though you might be a staunch security person and paranoid, you have to just document it and let it go. I've had discussions with officers and board of directors many times, and they'll say yes. Many times if I say, will you put it in writing? They'll say no, but I make sure it's documented in at least the minutes. So you need to think about various things, the appropriate level of security on these devices. Is everything encrypted? Is transmission encrypted? How are they going to communicate back to the network? And then can they even be on the corporate network? You need to think about all of these. You know, confidentiality, and I know that second bullet is about international. But if you happen to have any staff that go on vacation, do they take their corporate device with them? And if you're doing BYOD and they have corporate email on them, what do? Wipe it out for the 2 weeks while they're there and then add them back? It could be a requirement. You need to think about what your data is and what it's going to be processed on that device before you put it into their hands. Because once it's out there, it is going to be really hard to take it away. It can be done. I've done it, even with officers. but it is very hard, very, very hard. So, if you are thinking about this, you've probably looked at mobile device management systems, MDMs. I'm not going to do vendor specific. I'm not going to recommend a vendor because I don't know your requirements. I'm going to give you questions that you may say, heck no, we ain't going to implement this. And you may say, let's do that pilot and let's stage it. But the way to go with any type of mobile device program is with an MDM. That I will say. Without that, you don't know where your data is, you don't know who's accessing your data through those mobile devices. So an MDM is a requirement. So there's typical functionality. Yes, that allows you to register devices. Yes, it allows you to do reporting and logging. In the US, that's not a problem. So you need to think about some of those requirements. You also need to think about what type of devices are you going to allow. You know, when it was just the smartphone and the iPads really couldn't do too much, that wasn't too bad. But then there came the iPads. And then after the iPads, all of those wonderful Android devices. And now you have the Windows Phone and the Windows tablet and every other thing out there. That is a requirement. From a corporate perspective, what type of devices are you going to allow? And don't say everything, because you will definitely go gray and wind up in an asylum. We tried that up front, and we had to pull back on it because technology-wise, that will not work on the MDM you've selected. So set the rules up front of what type of devices you want. Don't forget internally with your legal requirements of separation of duties. My security team does not have any administrative access to our MDM. We can only get to the logs and pull reports. We have a totally separate group with delegation of authority that can add devices and remove devices, and even remotely wipe, because we don't want any accidental wiping of somebody's mobile device. So as you move forward with an MDM, think about that separation of duties. That needs to be one of your requirements, because many times the vendor will not tell you that, oh yeah, everybody's got to have admin access on the server to get admin access on the application and to even read the logs. There are some MDMs out there like that. So you need to think about that separation of duties. Also, when you have your devices, you have the screen lock. And yes, our users screened when they found out they had to have a 6-digit password and change this one every 90 days also, whether it was a corporate device or their personal device that they added. That will probably be your hardest requirement to get out to the user community. So you need to also think about that. You need to think about exceptions. Lord has some pilots that are part of our enterprise. And once in a while, I've been able to take the corporate jet. And the pilots know I'm security. And when one of the pilots comes up and shakes my hand, I know he wants something. And the one day he goes, you know, is there anything we can do about these iPads going into screensaver with the password? I said, that's a corporate policy that the officers have endorsed. And right now, it's set for 10 minutes. He goes, it takes us 20 minutes to land, and we have to keep touching the screen while we're landing because it keeps locking on us. I said, that's a good exception. Safety is a good exception. So we did set up a policy for the pilots, because now today, all pilots don't carry around those big bags. They carry all of their flight manuals and flight plans on some sort of mobile device. So if you happen to have any maintenance staff or people that are in safety type positions, You need to think about exceptions as you set up these requirements. And there will always be exceptions. Whatever you do for company-owned devices, you need to think about the same thing. I don't care how high they are in the company. The same requirements apply to personally owned devices. Just because you have title and rank does not mean you automatically get an exception. And that can be enforced. Yes, you may wind up being shy and timid going up to them and saying, no, you cannot have that. But that's the way it has to be. Explain the business risk to the information. And if your higher-ups are logical thinkers, they will understand that requirement. But privilege and rank does not give you the right to not follow your security requirements with an MDM. You also need to think about approvals. You know, with corporate-owned devices, most of the time, if somebody wants a special laptop, they've got to get extra approvals. Same thing goes with the mobile devices, especially when you start putting on personally owned devices. Now, with being in any organization, sometimes you have multi-generations that have moved up the ranks. There's a lot of friends who have been in the organization that have taken different career paths. So when you put the approval requirement in and say it's got to be a director or a vice president, make sure you put reporting or responsible director or vice president, because if not, they're going to go to their friend who's in an elevated management position to say, I got upper management approval, yet there's no business reason. So also think about that when you're bringing on personally owned devices and allowing anyone to be able to connect their personally owned device. So you need to think about the registration. MDMs will allow anybody to register their devices. And the IT department can put a pin on that so that they must come through and actually talk to somebody before their devices get registered. So all of these are requirements to think about as you are looking for an MDM or as you have one and are trying to ratchet down the configuration. You may want to find out whether or not it integrates into Active Directory or the Novell directory or an LDAP directory, depending upon what your infrastructure is. And if you do allow personally owned devices, you will want to set it up corporate owned versus personally owned. Because I can tell you, those personally owned devices are going to get jailbroke. And they're going to get compromised. So will corporate devices, but more often than not, it's going to be a personally owned device. So you need to think about those groups and how you're going to set them up. And also with the notifications. Do you make sure, when it's a personally owned device, that they can upgrade to any device anytime? I don't think so. If they are registered on your MDM, that is not going to work. Because with the iPhone, it was earlier this year, or when version 7 came out of the iPhone. If you had an MDM, 7 didn't work with most MDMs because of the little gotcha the upgrade had. And we had personally owned devices for a span of about 2 weeks that were not able to get corporate email because the users wanted the best technology, the fastest updates. So also establishing a mailing list for anybody that's registered about whether or not it's okay to upgrade. That can be a gotcha. So setting up that infrastructure is something you need to think about as you're moving forward. And I had talked about the types of devices. You know, they're continuing to grow and develop. Now, with the one thing with the Windows Phone and the Windows tablets with Windows 8, they can go through an MDM, or you can register them through Active Directory. That will have to be another decision that you will have to make internally. We've done a pilot with both AD as well as the MDM. MDM's the way to go, because you can control it a little bit better. So just something to think about as you're upgrading even your office technology as you're going forward. If you're going MDM, yes, everything is going up in the cloud. But do you want that device that's doing all your mobile device management in the cloud? It's a decision or a policy that you've had internally. I'm not saying it's good or bad. We made the decision to bring it internally. We have expert-controlled data, so we want to know what's going on those devices. With an MDM, you can also limit what type of apps and what apps go on those devices. So if it's corporate-owned, that's kind of easy to control. But if you start permitting personally owned devices, you know, my kid's school has this really cool app that I need. How is you as an IT or security department going to determine that risk? To say, oh yeah, that's no problem. So that's the other thing you need to think about for both corporate-owned as well as personally owned devices, is what type of apps are you going to allow on those devices? You know, some of them can be very dangerous for technically inclined users who like to do their own system backups on their own devices, which will be a story in a little bit. You may also want to do that whitelisting and blacklisting of website filtering. You have it probably for the corporate environment for anything that's connected to your corporate network. What about those mobile devices? The biggest discussion right now going on quite a few listservs is, do mobile devices really need an antivirus? I can't answer that for you because I don't know what your systems are. But just like a laptop or a desktop, the more apps, the more security you layer on is going to slow down the devices. I'm all for security and limiting risk. But there comes a balance of operational need versus risk and protection need. So that also needs to come into your MDM scheme as you're moving forward. Jailbreaking is when you have an app that is installed that compromises the operating system. That does not mean that the device has been hacked. In fact, many backup applications that you can install on your mobile devices jailbreak a device and compromise the operating system. So that's something you're going to need to think about. Whether it's a corporate device or a personally owned device, when it does get jailbroke, what are you going to do? You're getting corporate email on it. You might have a valid app that's tunneling back into your network. What happens if you call the user and they're not there? All of these decisions need to be decided upon before you implement. We do have a technically inclined user, and he found this really cool backup program, and we saw him installing it right on the MDM. And less than 10 minutes after he installed it, the alarm went off that his device had been jailbroken. But I want this app. It was his personally owned device. I said, then you have a choice. You can remove it from the device, and you can keep the device on the MDM and continue to get company mail, or we can remove the company email from it. Those are the only two choices. And as you go back to your staff, those are the only two choices. And we've had some users say, okay, take the MDM off, I don't want corporate email. For me, as a security person, yeah, that's good. I don't mind that, that's one less device I have to monitor. So you need to be firm about that. You really need to think about jailbreaking. Jailbreaking does not necessarily mean hacked. So you need to have requirements about jailbreaking and how you're going to handle it internally. And then the wonderful policies. And I know I may be a crazy security person, but I love policies and procedures. You know, past lives that I've done this, and yes, nobody likes them, but yes, I like to write them. I don't like the approval process, but it's a necessary evil when you have an MDM. You need to think about the processing questions and how you're going to use those devices and get it in writing. You need to have the highest level of the operating chain sign these policies. Maybe not the procedures, but those policies. At Lord, we did go up to all the vice president level, as well as the presidents in every one of our regions, to sign off on that policy. And on the procedures, we went to the directors in the regions, so that it is the top down, and we had the awareness from the bottom up. And knock on wood, in the past 2 months, we've not had any incidents, and it's been quiet. So it can be done. But you do need to think about how far the policies and procedures reach. What happens if I go home and now connect to my home network instead of using the provider? That's another gotcha if you don't think about it. You also need to think about your liability. Your data breach clauses, because a lot of data breach laws, again, are starting to change. With the presidential directive that came out in February and the NIST requirements that are supposed to come out, I think, next February or March, they're also considering mobile devices. We all use them. Healthcare was probably one of the very first fields that started using it. The one good thing with the MDM, with corporate-owned devices, is once it gets registered, those devices are encrypted. When you do the BYOD and start allowing the personally owned devices, wherever the corporate data is on those devices, it's encrypted, and it encrypts the personal device, or personal side of that information too. So that personally owned device is encrypted. And the one other good thing about the data breach and the data wiping is that if it is a personally owned device, you can wipe the corporate profile without wiping the personally owned side. There's also a little checkbox you can do and wipe the whole device, but you can separate the two. And that does, once in a while, happen, that you do wind up wiping the whole device of a personally owned device instead of just the corporate side. So you better have recovery procedures for that too. You also need to think about, and these next few slides are questions for you to think about. From a user side, if I'm going to put my personally owned device on the network, I want to know, are you going to look at what I'm surfing? Are you going to look at my apps? Are you going to look to see who I'm texting to in my personal business? The one thing with the MDMs, and if they are registered, yes, you can do that. So from a policy perspective, you need to think about whether or not you're going to do that and how you're going to escalate. That can have good and bad. Same thing from the corporate side. It should be written in policy that if it is a corporate device, you are going to monitor those apps that are being installed. It's also your choice to decide, I'll allow you to add these games, or I won't allow you to add these games. Those decisions need to be made before you start rolling this out. How are you going to recover the data on those devices? Many MDMs do have a side app that will allow you to back up the mobile devices. But those that have tens of hundreds of servers in your network, just think of the thousands of mobile devices that are out there, and do you want to do that? There are apps that'll back it up to the cloud, but you need to make that decision. On the recovery, we have in our policy, if the device is wiped, data's gone. We are not going to recover it. We're not going to back it up, even if it's a corporate device. Because if it is a corporate device, you should only be getting your email on there, and that's back up on the server. So there's no reason. Now, most devices, most MDMs, also have like a apps at work or a app connect where it will allow you to securely tunnel a mobile device back into your network. Do you want to allow that? And again, depending upon your business requirements, you may say yes or no. Those tunnels are similar to a VPN, virtual private network. Especially if you have an ERP system and somebody's out for the day and you need this approval, might be a good idea to have that mobile app. But that's a business requirement. But with any MDM, you always have to do reviews. When was the last time a device checked in? Our guideline is 14 days. Most of our business trips are under 2 weeks. So that's why we set it at 14 days. We give them 14 days to travel and connect back to the network somehow. Yours might be 30 days, it might be 7 days. And what we do is if they fail that requirement twice, we contact them and their manager directly, whether it's a personally owned device or a corporate owned device. We also have some rules set up about configuration on the mobile devices. And we have an alert once a week that comes up of those who might have tweaked the configuration of that mobile device. Good or bad, they've changed it from outside the policy, not jailbroke, but changed that policy somehow. We also do a little knock on the door when that happens. We also, on a quarterly basis, audit how many devices are registered, whether or not it's personally owned or corporate owned, because every device that's registered is going to up your license count. We also, every 6 months, with whatever email server you have, Exchange, group-wise, do a dump of what type of devices have connected by what accounts. So we also do another cross-check of who's found a way around the security to get the email on their personal device. So that monitoring and review has to be, I don't want to say sneaky, but you got to think of creative ways to be able to do your review and monitoring. Most of the logs on an MDM can be exported, tab delimited, exported into Access, Excel, SQL, Oracle, whatever type of database you have, so you can even now do more conditional auditing on those devices. So almost anything what you can do. Most MDMs don't have very nice reports, so definitely straight export, that's another gotcha, is directly export the logs and do your own monitoring. If you have a centralized log system, such as ArcSight or Logarithm, where everything's going in, now you can also start doing any patterning, I don't want to say profiling, but patterning for how your mobile devices are being used in the environment. Because the MDM can also log which apps they go out to the most. So if you have an issue of productivity with an employee, they have company-owned mobile devices, that's another way you can track them with the MDM. I'm not saying that the MDM is a miracle device, but it does help a lot with those requirements. So, throughout this whole session, if you just remember these 10 key points, it kind of gets you thinking about what you need as you're looking at MDM technology, as you're upgrading, as you're expanding, or just re-reviewing your controls of what you need to do with an MDM. You know, mobile devices can be fun. You know, if you're, as they spoke earlier, out on the golf course, they'll never know where you're at as you're replying. That you could be in a meeting on the other side of campus when you might be on the other side of the world, like I was in Asia 2 weeks ago. I'm replying during US time, 13 hours later, to questions and emails and giving approvals over the phone because I didn't feel like booting up my laptop. So from an efficiency point and productivity point, mobile devices can be a very big benefit. BYOD, that first slide I have had up, bring your own destruction. If you don't do it in pilot form and know what you want to do, don't allow those personally owned devices. Are they really needed? What is the need to the business to allow a personally owned device? Yes, I don't want to carry 2 devices around this size. That is the biggest business reason I have seen when people want to add their personally owned device. I don't want to carry 2 devices. Tough luck. If you don't want to put that in as your requirement, the answer is really tough luck, in a more politically correct way. But those are the requirements that you need to set up or bring back in as you continue to move forward. Now, I'm not going to just skip the questions and answers, but I do want this slide up so that if you don't get on the website to download the slides, you can email me either at my personally owned, see, I'm that way anyway, my personal email or my corporate email. If you do the SAN presentations, I only do that for conferences. So that email, even if it's 6 months down the road, you can always email that one and it'll be, just let me know which conference, I keep track. So I'm going to turn it over to everyone, and are there any questions? Hope I didn't scare you. George?
On the email aspect, if a personal device is on MDM, can they still get webmail?
If you do not have OWA, you know, with Exchange locked down, yes. If you have it with VPN to get to OWA, yes, they can still get to it.
One of the ways they keep it workaround.
Yes, and we have email, webmail disabled both externally in and internally to stop that backdoor. Hope I didn't scare y'all. Yes, sir.
You mentioned corporate profiles and then personal profiles. That's only available on certain smartphones and certain devices, right?
Currently, most of the Androids and the iPhones will allow you to have 2 profiles up there. And really what it is, it's almost like doing a VM on a smart device is really what it is, to have those 2 profiles up there. And just like on a smartphone, you can add different email accounts, which are essentially different profiles. That's exactly what it is when you do corporate and personal on here, simplified way. I must have put you to sleep then. You can't be off that sugar high from lunch. All right, well then if there are no other questions, I do thank you for your time and attendance, and I appreciate everybody listening. Thank you.